Operation Popeye. Operation Popeye never ended, but in fact it metastasized. Weather warfare is real. One would be a fool to not account for militarized disaster capitalism, land grabs for developers, mining operations, and 15-minute cities. My mom's house in New Mexico back in the 1930s, before she owned it, used to be in a town called Santa Rita? Or was it Santa Rosa? I don't remember. Santa Rita, Santa Rosa is no longer there because it's now the second largest open pit mine, silver, copper, gold in the state. The rate at which this mine is growing is nightmarish. Not to mention the millions of tons of arsenic and other chemicals in smaller amounts like mercury dumped every day, and millions of gallons of water depleted and polluted per minute from rare desert aquifers. If you were to drive the perimeter of the mine, let's just imagine the mine is the shape. If you're looking down at the mine like a topographic map, for the sake of simplicity, let's just picture a square. You're looking down on a square. And if you were to drive one length of that square, it might take 20 minutes to drive the length of that square. And then you turn to drive another length, it's another 20 minutes. And maybe 10 years ago, that same drive was 10 minutes. I'm just hypothetically kind of giving an example of the rate at which this mine is growing. It's massive. When you look down in it, those yellow dump trucks where one tire is the size of a school bus, they just look like a tiny ant down, like a tiny speck of yellow down in the deep, massive caldera, that huge pit. 40 minutes away, you can hear the hum of the mine. It never stops, It never stops. Who owns it? Technically, it's a company called Phelps Dodge, I think, but I don't even know what Phelps Dodge is anymore. I'm sure it's an international conglomeration of globalists at this point. That mine, the inception of it, let's go back 140 years to the late 1860s. Is that that's how many years ago is the 1860s? You're looking at 140 plus another 20 some, 160 years ago. Late 1800s. The Apache chief Mungus Coloradus. He was a 7-foot tall Apache chief. His head was chopped off by local sheriffs and then mailed to Washington, D.C. because he tried to protect the land there from such extractive operations, land grabs, mining, resource acquisition of the trees and water and all the things. They chopped his head off and mailed it to Washington and then dug in. The Fed eliminated him. The sheriffs were told by the Fed to chop his head off and mail it to them. My mom's house is now about maybe a 30 or 40 minute drive from where it used to be at the mine site. And now her nice, quiet, safe neighborhood, it's becoming a drug and gang warfare zone, an invasion from a different type of mining. This brings up land grabs and war zones. Operation Popeye, a war weapon, it never ended, but in fact it metastasized. Russia uses weather warfare. China uses weather warfare. Places like the United Arab Emirates, UAE. They use weather modification, cloud seeding on a daily basis. I've done a lot of posts on my Patreon talking about the aerosolized fly ash from big coal, big electric power plants that's being sprayed every day all around the world. Big energy is a extension of big military. Big energy is an extension of big military. You don't have a Department of Defense without having a Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy is a collaboration with private and state-owned energy companies. And the toxic, radioactive, heavy metal, particulate, nanoparticulate matter, aluminum, strontium, barium, all of those things, you don't have a intelligent way to store that lightweight nanoparticulate powder. Something like 1.2 billion tons of it is supposedly created every year globally, and many millions of those tons are in the United States. And there's no intelligent way to store that lightweight powder. A very small fraction of it becomes laden in the cement, the process and creation of cement, but that's a fraction of what the overall amount of fly ash is. So in the solution to pollution is dilution, they just spray it on us. And that bioaccumulates in our soil. The soil becomes more and more laden with toxic metals. The toxic metals affect the trees. The trees begin not having the capacity and capability to fight off parasite infections and things like that. Beetles, bark beetles. They lose their immunity, their ability to have an immune system, no different than if a human was injected with heavy metals over and over, that it compromises their immune system. The trees are no different. So bugs and parasites and beetles and fungus wind up decimating entire populations of things like ponderosa trees, ash trees, Douglas fir trees. So you have these mass die-offs happening all over the world with trees, which create more desert regions. And that's something I've been talking about in a lot of my other Patreons. So my mom's neighborhood, which used to be quiet and safe, is becoming a drug and gang warfare zone. This is an invasion from a different type of parasite. And this brings up the whole topic of land grabs and war zones. Operation Popeye never ended, but in fact it metastasized. The spraying of fly ash is part of that operation. The unintentional benefit to the global warming community is that you can spray that fly ash and you kill two birds with one stone. You get rid of this incredibly expensive hazardous waste. If you're going to store that hazardous waste, it's going to cost a ton of money to build containment sites, hire people to transport it, guard it. Just get rid of it, spray it. Yeah, that's expensive too, but over time, it's a lot less expensive than storing it. So the weather warfare is real. Getting sprayed with fly ash is like living in a kind of a peaceful war. It's like a slow motion peaceful war. You're getting sprayed with toxic poisons. It's a war on your weather. It's a war on your soil. It's a war on your water. And the chemtrail community, the people that know chemtrails exist, they're kind of easily ridiculed because one, they're not on the same page. There's a lot of different types of weather modification, but by and large, the most massive one that we need to get on the same page with is the spraying of fly ash, because it dims the sun. It does cause all sorts of environmental destruction. That's a whole other sidebar from the manufacturing of massive deluges of rain, which is what Operation Popeye was. So a hurricane just hit Florida, the Carolinas, places like Asheville, North Carolina, were just absolutely demolished. Towns in the mountains around that area are just gone. Hundreds of people dead. The mainstream media not even talking about it. Meanwhile, our government's giving billions of dollars to the Ukraine, billions of dollars to Israel, and you could rest assured that you could rest in your own confidence that the money from our taxes it will not help or benefit the people in that devastation. And this is where the Operation Popeye comes in. The weather warfare is real. It's connected to land grabs. Every single war is about resource acquisition. So Operation Popeye was created during the Vietnam War. The U.S. government got in trouble for using weather against civilians, and they got a slap on the wrist. They said they'd never do it again, but of course they still do it again. And so does every other big military, from India, Russia, China, Japan. Every single big military, France, Germany, they're all doing weather warfare, weather modification. All of them. You'd be a fool to think that just stopped. And you would be wise to know that it metastasized. Weather warfare is real. One would be a fool to not account for militarized disaster capitalism, for the transfer of wealth, land grabs, for 15-minute city developers and globalist resource acquisitions such as water, wood, rock, lithium, gold, copper, silver, coal, oil, and all sorts of other mining operations, zinc, etc. So the whole area where Asheville, North Carolina is, it's obviously in the crosshairs right now for big land grabs, resource acquisition, transfer of wealth. There's a loud bird chirping in the background right now. I'm sure you can hear that in the audio right now. I'm always looking for quiet, clean audio, and it's harder and harder to find. It's hard to find it away from the sound of trucks and traffic. I don't mind the birds so much. This one's pretty loud. My prayers go out for the people in Asheville and other parts of the South that are absolutely devastated and harmed and hurt by this war on them. You know, you can look further into it. France, Germany. There's an area in the Atlantic Ocean where France and Germany are manufacturing weather, and these are basically manufactured tropical storms that then can be geoengineered into bigger and bigger and bigger storm systems. And then if you fill those storm systems by aerosolizing metallic nanoparticulates, aka fly ash, into those systems, then you can steer those systems magnetically with ionospheric heaters and things like that. So it's really not rocket science. It's pretty simple. It's just large operations of something just rooted in basic physics 101. Anyone who gaslights you and says these things are not happening, they're just complete ignoramuses. There's a couple things I'd like to say more about this before I wrap up. Let me just say a couple things more. You know, it was under the, I think it was in the 1990s, under Clinton, maybe earlier, where the U.S. was borrowing, I'm going to say borrowing in quotes, money from countries like Japan and China. And the agreement was to pay them back by allowing them access to our resources. China, etc., no joke, began collaborating with our own government. You would never believe it. even shipping fresh water from the Great Lakes to China. From the Great Lakes, they were shipping barge loads, like oil tanker loads of water from the Great Lakes to China. This is true. Literally drastically lowering the lakes. Our national forests, too, being absolutely robbed for all sorts of resources to pay back the, quote, debt to these foreign countries. It's basically the same debt game the U.S. played on smaller countries, countries like Venezuela and Brazil, Guatemala, etc., that China began playing on us through extortion and such. I mean, let's admit it. Joe Biden is the most extorted man in human history. He's the least free person on earth. This is why he and his subordinate Kamala Harris hate your freedom. It's why they want to censor your speech. They hate your freedom. John Kerry, it's why he wants to take a hammer to the U.S. Constitution and smash the First Amendment into oblivion, because they hate your freedom. They're the most extorted people in human history. They are slaves. That's why they hate your freedom. They're being extorted, blackmailed, the same way our own hyenas, our own CIA hyenas, our economic hitmen used to exploit the leaders of other countries through extortion, blackmail, and harm to their family members and such. So China's been playing this same game on us. But it's exploded out of control to the point where it's a new wild, wild west. It's a free-for-all. Places like Asheville, North Carolina, are now in the crosshairs as of late. Our only protection from this invasion used to be with the nuclear threat. All the powerful countries knew we were the richest in resources, but their tactical invasion shifted to something we used to only see happening far away, where foreign governments were infiltrated by us, by our CIA, and we would fund their guerrilla insurgencies, lots of different tribes and different enemies. We would stir up all sorts of chaos, infighting, multiple different fighting tribes, hating each other, fighting amongst each other. And while there was the fog of that chaos, it allowed our government, what is our government but a consortium of just basically mafioso cartels? It would allow those mafioso cartels to rob and steal from that foreign land, take all their resources, funnel it all upwards into a small consortium of wealth. And all of this has come home now to the United States. We are being turned into an Iraq. It's interesting, for example, to post stories about, say, the explosion of the fracking industry taking over places like the previously pristine northern Pennsylvania, where I used to go to a little lake called Tyler Lake when I was a kid. And it's now an Iraqi-like oil field. Look up Vera Scroggins, V-E-R-A Scroggins, S-C-R-O-G-G-I-N-S. She's like the only one over the last 10, 20 years that's been talking about it. The only person. That whole area has been turned into an Iraqi-like oil field, that part of northern Pennsylvania, and it's happening to other places. Of course, it happened to the entire region of Midland, Texas. It's happening to Michigan. But all the, quote, truthers, they ignore it. They post about other problems. Race, gender, these other things are problematic, but it's odd to see an invasion where the land and water is just being absolutely poisoned forever by an invasion. And this invasion is from an international consortium of juntas and cartels that are just taking over. This whole area, northern Pennsylvania, it's like an Iraqi oil field, but the truthers, they ignore it. They post about race, gender, political distractions, etc. while the water is being poisoned forever and the land becomes toxic overnight forever. 5,000 to 7,000 fracking operations in Pennsylvania alone per year. And their plan is to do this for the next 15, 20, 30 years. And absolutely nobody talks about it. And who works in these companies? Cheap and ignorant labor. This is the border crisis. This is the invasion of the borders to bring in more and more cheap, ignorant labor. People just desperate to make a decent paycheck. You know, to get paid to destroy the water, air, soil, all to just make a little bit of money to put right back into the exorbitant, parasitic landlord's hands, landowners' hands. The whole thing's a company mine. Our mortgages, our rent, it's all just a company mine. Like, the company mine didn't go anywhere. That little town in New Mexico that I used to tell you about, the house that my mom has, I imagine in the 1930s, miners picked it up, put it on a huge mining truck, and drove it 40 miles away and plopped it down so that it wouldn't just get demolished inside the open pit mine that was coming. But that was one of the company mine homes back in the day, you know? The miner would wake up, work in the mine, and then pay his rent right back to the owner of the mine. You know, he just works all day to give the money right back to the owner of the mine so that he can have a shelter over his head. It's the same thing we're in. It's the same thing. So places like Asheville, it's just a lot more aggressive. The company mine is like, hey, we need to kind of like clean slate and make the company mine a little bit more efficient. So we're just going to like wipe away, etch a sketch, shake it up, and then make it a little more efficient into a easily surveilled 15-minute city where the workers in the company mine, where it just goes like a lot more efficiently from their pockets into the landlord's pockets. Slavery. Thanks for listening. If you want to support my Patreon, I would appreciate it at Low Lit Studio. You can listen to some of it for free, and some of it is not free. I ask for either $3 a month, or if you want to be a little bit more generous, $5 a month. Either way, you get the same stuff, and I'd love it if you could write me and let me know who you are, where you're at, what's happened in your life, what you're seeing, boots on the ground, that kind of stuff. All right, thanks. Bye.